YouTube, what the crap's going on? HeirofCarthage here, and we're in Total War Warhammer 2 to determine which cavalry unit is the best when facing down other cavalry units. Alright, so here we are. I'm going to explain how I tested and what I was testing for. So today's purpose is to determine which faction has the best of the best heavy cavalry that is good against other heavy cavalry. So who can bring out the best heavy cavalry and with some degree of certainty expect to trounce their opponents. Now, I will say, let me explain the testing method here. This method is going to test vanilla unit against vanilla unit using a mod on a flat map. The mod allows me to pick any unit as the Lord, so that there is no Lord. So this is a Lord-free test. Now, the caveat to this is that how many times do you fight a battle in Total War Warhammer without a Lord, absent of all other units? Well, you don't. So again, the purpose of this is if two units clash head-to-head and no other forces are enacting, who's going to win? So we'll start with Demigryph Knights with halberds because I consider them to probably be the best anti-cavalry, heavy cavalry in the game. So we're going to start with them and we're going to test them against all the other big boys from the other factions. I will see you on the battle map and let's go see who has the best cavalry for destroying other cavalry. Alright, first up is going to be Dragon Princes from the High Elves. Now these guys, before the old factions hit Warhammer 2, these guys were definitely the best of the best. So let's see what happens. Both units are going to charge each other. I know the charge with the Demigryphs is a little bit faulty, but it'll be okay. So Demigryph Knights versus Dragon Princes. Who's going to win this fight? Now, Demigryph Knights have anti-large and armor-piercing to a significant degree, whereas Dragon Princes, although being well-armored and having martial prowess, which gives them extra stats in melee and defense, while they're above 50% hit points, I think it's 50% hit points. Yeah, now it's gone. So they're going to be really good on the charge, and they're going to deal a lot of damage, but when the fight prolongs, Demigryph Knights are going to start running away with the victory because they have a bonus versus large and a bonus versus armor that the Dragon Princes do not have. Now, this is not terribly surprising. Dragon Princes are not really an anti-cavalry unit. You can see here they're going to lose convincingly. So trying to trade a Dragon Prince for a Demigryph Knight, unless there's some outside factor, is going to be a poor trade, whether you're playing in campaign or you're playing in multiplayer. Again, there's spells. There's spells that heal. There's spells that debuff. All those things have to be considered. There's infantry that can support, but if it's just two units going head-to-head to slog it, Dragon Princes will lose to Demigryph Knights every time. Alright, so next up is Cold One Dread Knights. These are a new unit for the Dark Elves, and it's the best cavalry that the Dark Elves can offer. It does have an anti-armor bonus, but it does not have a bonus versus large. And also, a thing to remember with these Cold One Dread Knights is that any Cold One unit can potentially rampage and lose control, which Demigryph Knights don't have to worry about. So, to me, that is a potential deciding factor. Let's check out the charge between these. The AI was being a little bit screwy with his charges, so you're going to see me kind of bait and switch him a little bit to convince him to charge me, and then we'll get the charges here. So here comes the Cold One Dread Knights, charging into Demigryphs. Let's back out and see how the fight goes. The Cold One Dread Knights actually have a little bit less charge bonus than the Demigryph Knights with halberds, and Demigryph Knights with halberds don't have the biggest charge bonus amongst cavalry, so it immediately puts the Dread Knights at a loss. And then the rampage isn't going to help them. Though you'll see that compared to the Dragon Princes, the Cold One Dread Knights inflict significantly more damage on the Demigryph Knights before dying, and the reason for that is their armor-piercing value and their weapon strength. So some of their weapon damage goes straight through the Demigryph Knight's armor, but again, you can see it is still a decisive victory, and cost-wise, this is not a good trade. So the Cold One Dread Knight costs less, but the Demigryph Knight beats it so convincingly. It's the same thing with the Dragon Prince. Both cost less than Demigryph Knights, but the Demigryph Knight beats it so convincingly that it's really not close in the end. So again, Cold One Dread Knights can be used in an anti-cavalry role. Just remember, they don't have specifically a bonus versus large, which means that any unit that does is probably going to have a leg up on them. Their armor piercing is handy. It makes them a pretty dangerous unit, but not up to snuff with Demigryph Knights with halberds in a one-on-one, all other things excluded match. Alright, so we'll start this one a little bit differently. Here's Horned Ones. These are fielded by the Lizardmen. Huge armor piercing bonus. 100 armor, which isn't bad, and 54 charge, so they slightly outcharge the Demigryph Knights. They certainly outnumber them, just by numbers. But again, Rampage is still a factor here. But again, much better armor piercing damage. Let's see what happens when they go toe-to-toe with Demigryph Knights with halberds. So again, the Demigryph Knights' main benefit is that they both have anti-armor and anti-large, and it makes them a particularly dangerous unit to other cavalry and honestly monsters as well. Now if you look though, this fight, the Horned Ones on the charge actually dealt a significant amount of damage and brought the fight to where they were actually leading. So this is the first time we've seen a unit lead the Demigryph Knights with halberds. However, leading a fight and finishing a fight are two different things, and you can see that as the combat draws on, the anti-large from the Demigryph Knights and the slight armor difference here, I say slight, it's 25, which is a pretty significant armor difference, ends up going in favor of the Demigryph Knights, who started off down but managed to pull the fight back. The Horned One's weapon strength, 35 armor piercing, and Demigryph Knights with halberds, 35 armor piercing, so it's the same. It's that 28 bonus versus large that's helping them get extra hits on the Horned Ones. It was a much closer fight, but again, even when we look at cost here, it's kind of hard to say. We'll actually exit this and look at the cost just to be certain. But if you look there, the Horned Ones still left a significant portion of the Demigryph Knight left, and I want to say that they cost either 13 or 1400, so still not a good trade for the Lizardmen in the end. Again, this is absent of the buffs or healing from other units or support from other units. Alright, next unit up is Blood Knights from the Vampire Counts or Musion. Blood Knights are an extremely capable cavalry. They have a huge charge at 78. You know, well, it's not their base, but they have frenzy and some other things in place. So, however, I will say off the bat that this charge isn't going to be, or this fight isn't going to be entirely fair, because like any vampire unit, Blood Knights heavily depend on the leadership and the replenishment, the healing that they get from hero units on the battlefield. But we're going to show this just again, vanilla, head-to-head. The Blood Knight actually costs more. It's going to have a significant charge bonus, but the Demigryph Knights have anti-large and anti-armor, whereas the Blood Knights are only rocking anti-large and don't have the armor-piercing element. You can see that they do cause a substantial amount of damage, but once the fight starts to even out after that charge, Demigryph Knights are going to start to take a commanding lead in terms of who's winning. We'll fast forward it just to show you all. So the Blood Knights put up a good fight, but remember, again, the Blood Knight costs 200 more than the Demigryph Knight, and eventually when the Blood Knight loses its leadership, it crumbles, giving the Demigryph Knight an even little bit better lopsided victory. So at this point we've got crumbling, and then it's fading. So Blood Knights are going to get beat, again, decisively by Demigryph Knights. There's still 14 units left in the Demigryph Knight. So what holds Blood Knights back? Well, Blood Knights are an interesting multi-purpose unit. They don't have armor piercing, but they do have anti-large, and they have a massive charge bonus. That means that Blood Knights are actually a pretty good combo unit in terms of destroying infantry and destroying monsters and cavalry. They're just not going to be the best at either one, if that makes sense. So without anti-armor, it means against armored infantry or armored cavalry that they may not be as good, but they get the benefit of being able to be healed constantly by necromancers and lords. So, Heir, it's not really fair if you don't show Blood Knights getting healed. True, but remember, Demigryph Knights can also be healed on the battlefield. So let's take a look at that scenario real quick and see if it changes things. Alright, so like I said earlier, Blood Knights are definitely better when they're supported by a hero. So I've got a Necromancer here who has two abilities that are going to cause constant regeneration of the Blood Knights, and I've given him Invocation of Nehek. Now, only to be fair, I have some Demigryph Knights, and I've given them a Jade Wizard with Restoration. Now, Restoration is another healing spell. It cannot resurrect the dead, and there's no constant healing from the Jade Wizard, but Restoration imparts a physical resistance up to 22% and healing. So let's see if Invocation of Nehek and the healing of the Necromancer can overcome Restoration. So immediately off the charge, again, Blood Knights and Demigryphs both take a lot of damage. Here comes Invocation into Heck, plus the Necromancer is healing. But as soon as the Demigryph Knights get this 22% physical, then it's really going to start making a big difference here, because they start resisting a significant amount of the damage. And again, yes, Blood Knights are better when supported, and if you don't have the proper support from the Empire. Now, I would say that every Vampire army, almost bar none, is going to come with Invocation into Heck and extra healing. Not necessarily every Empire army is going to come with healing, but it can. And so I felt it was only fair to test it in this setting. You can see that the Blood Knights get completely faded, and Demigryph Knights win an even bigger victory when you factor in the support that can come in. And now this is even aside from the fact that you have nets, guns, and other things that the vampires don't have access to. So even though I think Blood Knights are capable of defeating Demigryph Knights with halberds in the right scenario, really, Demigryph Knights are still just the better unit. That's all there is to it in my opinion here. You all can disagree with me, but that's what it looks like to me. I say they're the better unit. They're the better unit for anti-cavalry purposes. Anti-cavalry purposes. Alright, folks, they give their body and soul to the lady. It's the Grail Knights. So how do Grail Knights stack up against Demigryph Knights with halberds? Well, Grail Knights have significantly less armor at only 90. That was a change whenever Bretonnia got fully fleshed out, and it hurts Grail Knights. A lot of these other cavalry just have more armor, but Grail Knights got physical resistance, a significant amount, and they have perfect vigor, which means that they never tire, which means that throughout a fight and throughout a battle, they will fight at full stamina the entire time, which is actually a huge deal and makes them very unique. Now, if you were in a late game battle of Grail Knights versus one of their opponents, it may be very, very different. And here, the Grail Knights are going to have a massive charge bonus. They're in the Lance formation at 112. But even with that charge bonus, what Grail Knights lack is anti-armor. And Demigryph Knights have really high armor. You can see, though, still, that charge bonus and that bonus versus large that the Grail Knights have allows them to inflict massive damage on the Demigryph Knights early. But just like it was the story with other units, as the fight wears on, Demigryph Knights just start to gain the advantage over their opponents in long-term combat because of the combination of anti-large and armor piercing. So Grail Knights also have access to the Lore of Life, and they can be buffed with regrowth, the same that Demigryph Knights can. But if you assume that both units get the spell at the same time, we have to assume that the outcome is probably similar. Maybe not, but could be similar. And you can see here the Grail Knights put up a pretty decent fight, you know, considering what certain other units did, especially for a unit that doesn't have armor piercing. They put up a good fight, but it's still not a good trade. Basically, everything we've seen so far says don't trade your heavy cavalry straight into Demigryph Knights unless you have support. So right now, Demigryph Knights still reigning supreme. There is one more unit I want to take a look at, though. Alright, Nurgle's Pestilent Glory here in the Chaos Knights with lances. So these guys are an interesting unit. They have very high armor at 120. They've got a full unit at 45, and they inflict 80 charge bonus, 46 weapon strength, which is very high, and 42 melee attack, which is quite high. However, no anti-large and no anti-armor. They're just going to pack a massive wallop on the charge, and we'll see how that goes. I would expect that Demigryph Knights with lances are going to win this one with relative ease. These two units are priced exactly the same. So Chaos Knights with lances coming in at the exact same cost as a Demigryph Knight with halberd. Let's watch them clash, and I'll keep the unit screen down here open, and also where you all can see the bars up here. Again, on the charge, Chaos Knights with lances landing just about as much damage as the Demigryph Knights, but then as soon as the prolonged fight gets underway, the Chaos Knights with lances just get absolutely slaughtered. And again, Demigryph Knights just have the perfect combination. That's what makes them such an effective unit against other cavalry and such a useful unit. And it's not just cavalry that Demigryph Knights are useful against. They're useful against lords who are mounted. They're useful against monsters. They're useful against all kinds of stuff. A Demigryph Knight with halberd is just straight up good unit, a very good unit. Some might say, well, hey, it's overpriced. I don't think it's overpriced. And I'm going to exit back out to the custom battle screen and kind of talk about the results here. So my results say that if you're just going head-to-head to see which unit is the best, kind of a paper battle, right? it doesn't have anything to do with a real battle, because there could be spearmen who come into a fight. There could be a lord who dives into a fight. There could be a massive spell that comes into a fight. I can't account for every single variable. But when it comes to just being the best unit both on paper and in a one-on-one fight, for anti-cavalry purposes, it is far and away the Demigryph Knights with halberds. Now, again, I've heard people over time, these guys probably did used to be overpowered for their price. Their price got increased after the game released, Warhammer 1 released, that is. Are they overpowered? In my opinion, no. And the reason no is because the Empire, their infantry is where they're going to lose to a lot of other factions. So the Empire kind of gets the advantage of having these Demigryph Knights and then great support units, like a lot of magic and guns and nets and all that kind of stuff. But they lack, their infantry line is where they lose an advantage frequently. And then monstrous units, the Empire doesn't have these big monster units like a lot of factions do. Sure, they've got Imperial Griffins, they've got a steam tank, and these Demigryphs, but that's really the big difference between the Empire and some of these other factions, and that's why I think that Demigryph Knights with halberds actually mix in quite well. So it's a whole other question, of course, if we want to look at heavy cavalry from who's best against infantry. We'll look at that on another day if you want to, but what kind of unit comparisons do you want to see next? Did you enjoy this? Was it useful? Do you think I need to do something different? Obviously, I think the first thing people would say is, Heir, you need to test against another person. That's true. But, you know, even if the AI's charge bonus was a little wonky on a few of these, the results were pretty clear. There was nothing that was that close in this case that I feel like an AI charge bonus really made the difference. I will test against a human if necessary, but it's just easier for me to record it like this. But again, curious what you all think, and hope you all enjoyed this. This was a request from someone in comments, so I wanted to make it for you and get you some cool footage of heavy cavalry clashing and just trying to determine who is the best amongst the best. And in this case, for the purpose of anti-cavalry, it's Demigryph Knights with halberds as far as I'm concerned. If you think I'm wrong, tell me why in the chat. Appreciate MSI sponsoring the channel. Appreciate you all being here and good viewers who request stuff like this. Tell me what else you want to see on the channel. I'll see what I can do about it. HeirofCarthage, signing out for now.